If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Sharing it with your friends and family helps spread knowledge. And when we help others grow, we grow too. Thank you so much for listening. Let's dive into the podcast. The routine flight. MH370 departs Kuala Lumpur. The night was calm at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Terminal lights cast long shadows across the tarmac as ground crews prepared Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 for its journey to Beijing. The date was March 8, 2014. Nobody knew they were witnessing the start of aviation's greatest mystery. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah walked through his pre-flight checks with practiced ease. At 53 years old, he had logged over 18,000 flight hours. His co-pilot, Farik Abdul Hamid, was younger but skilled. Together, they prepared the Boeing 777-200ER for what should have been a routine 6-hour flight. Passengers began boarding just after midnight. Business travelers clutched their laptops. Families carried sleeping children. Art students from China chatted excitedly about their trip home. Among them sat two men traveling on stolen Austrian and Italian passports. Their presence would later spark wild theories, but that night, they were just faces in the crowd. The cabin filled with the usual sounds of commercial travel. Overhead bins snapped shut. Flight attendants demonstrated safety procedures to passengers who barely looked up from their phones. Everything felt perfectly normal. At 12:41 a.m. local time, the massive aircraft pushed back from gate C1. The Boeing 777 taxied slowly toward the runway, its engines humming with quiet power. Weather conditions were ideal. Clear skies stretched ahead for the 2,700-mile journey north. The tower cleared MH370 for takeoff at 12:42 a.m. Captain Shah guided the aircraft down the runway as it gathered speed. Within moments, all 239 souls aboard were airborne, climbing steadily into the darkness above Malaysia. Air traffic controllers watched the plane's transponder signal on their screens. The green dot moved exactly where it should, following the planned route toward Vietnamese airspace. Radio chatter between the cockpit and ground control sounded routine, professional, unremarkable. Passengers settled in for the overnight flight. Some pulled blankets over their shoulders. Others opened books or started movies on their seatback screens. The cabin lights dimmed to help people sleep during the red-eye journey. At 1:01 a.m., the aircraft communications, addressing and reporting system sent its last automatic message. This computer system regularly transmitted the plane's position and status. Everything appeared normal. 19 minutes later, at 1:19 a.m., co-pilot Farik's voice crackled over the radio with what would become the flight's final transmission. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Those 5 words marked the end of routine communication. Within minutes, MH370's transponder went silent. The aircraft vanished from civilian radar screens. What happened next would baffle investigators, spawn countless theories, and leave families searching for answers that remain hidden to this day. The ordinary flight had become something extraordinary and terrifying. Silence over the South China Sea. Loss of communication. At 1:19 in the morning, the voice crackled through the radio at Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control. "Good night, Malaysian 370. The words sounded normal, routine, just another pilot signing off before passing into Vietnamese airspace. But something strange was already happening in the darkness above the South China Sea. The air traffic controller in Kuala Lumpur expected Vietnam to take over radio contact within minutes. This was standard procedure. Planes cross from one country's airspace to another dozens of times each day. Controllers pass planes back and forth like runners in a relay race. Vietnam waited. Their radios stayed quiet. 2 minutes after that final message, something invisible occurred high above the ocean. The aircraft's transponder stopped working. This small device sends out a signal every few seconds, telling ground control exactly where the plane is flying. Without it, the aircraft becomes a ghost on radar screens. Air traffic controllers stared at their green displays. The bright dot that showed Flight 370 had vanished. One moment it was there. The next moment, nothing but empty ocean appeared on their screens. At first, nobody panicked. Equipment fails sometimes. Radio signals get blocked by weather or mountains. Controllers in both countries tried calling the plane. Their voices echoed into empty air. Malaysian 370, Kuala Lumpur. Silence. Malaysian 370, Ho Chi Minh City. Still nothing. Minutes turned into an hour. The absence of any response grew more troubling with each passing moment. Controllers began following emergency procedures. They called other aircraft flying in the area. Had anyone seen Flight 370? Did other pilots hear any distress calls? The answers came back negative. Something even stranger had occurred alongside the transponder failure. The plane's ACARS system had also stopped sending signals. This computer automatically transmits routine information about the aircraft's health and position every 30 minutes. It works like a digital heartbeat, letting ground crews know everything is working properly. Both systems failing at nearly the same time was highly unusual. Controllers had never seen anything quite like this before. Emergency procedures kicked into high gear. Phone calls flew between control centers in Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand. Everyone asked the same question: where was Flight 370? The night sky held its secrets tightly. Somewhere above the vast darkness of the South China Sea, a Boeing 777 had simply disappeared from the modern world's electronic eyes and ears. Vanishing from radar. The disappearance in the Andaman Sea. The Boeing 777 continued its silent journey through the darkness, now far from its intended path. While civilian radar had lost sight of the aircraft, Malaysian military radar stations painted a different picture. Their screens showed an unidentified target moving across the peninsula. The operators watched as the mysterious blip traced a path they had never seen before. The aircraft crossed over familiar landmarks, flying above sleeping cities and quiet forests. It moved with purpose, following airways that commercial pilots knew well. Yet something felt wrong about this midnight visitor. Military radar tracked the target as it turned northwest. The plane flew over the Andaman Sea, a vast stretch of water that had swallowed many secrets before. Controllers noted the aircraft's steady flight pattern. It maintained altitude and speed like any normal commercial flight. Nothing suggested distress or mechanical failure. At 2:22 in the morning, something changed. The radar returns simply stopped appearing. One moment, the screen showed a clear signal. The next moment, nothing but empty space. The aircraft had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. Technicians checked their equipment twice. The radar systems worked perfectly. Weather conditions posed no interference. Yet the target had disappeared from their screens without explanation. In the world of modern aviation, planes do not simply cease to exist. Days passed before officials realized the significance of this radar data. Different agencies had captured pieces of the puzzle, but no one had assembled the complete picture. Military controllers had logged an unidentified aircraft. Civilian radar had recorded a plane going off course. Air traffic controllers had witnessed a sudden loss of contact. The delayed sharing of information created confusion. Each group possessed vital clues, but communication gaps prevented a clear understanding of events. Investigators later worked to match timestamps and flight paths, slowly building a timeline of the aircraft's final movements. When analysts finally studied the radar returns, they confirmed a chilling reality. The unidentified target matched MH370's known position and timing perfectly. The military had unknowingly watched the missing Boeing 777 during its final tracked moments. This revelation transformed the search efforts. Teams had been looking in the wrong area entirely. The aircraft had flown much farther west than anyone initially believed. The Andaman Sea became the new focus of international rescue operations. The implications struck investigators deeply. A modern jetliner carrying 239 people had vanished without warning or distress call. Advanced radar systems had tracked it for hours, yet no one realized a tragedy was unfolding in real time. The ocean had claimed another mystery, leaving only questions in its wake. The search expands. Multinational efforts and new clues. Ships cut through dark waters as dawn broke over the South China Sea. Military vessels from Malaysia, Vietnam, and China spread across the surface like pieces on a vast board game. Each crew searched for any trace of Flight 370. The ocean gave back only silence. Then, something changed everything. Military officers in a quiet room reviewed their radar screens from that terrible night. The green dots and lines told a different story than anyone expected. The aircraft had turned. It flew west across Malaysia. It crossed back over land before heading toward the Indian Ocean. This news sent shockwaves through command centers worldwide. If the radar was right, everything they knew was wrong. The plane had flown for hours after vanishing from civilian radar. Someone or something had kept it in the air. Teams of experts gathered around computer screens in London. Inmarsat satellite engineers studied ping signals their satellite had received from the missing aircraft. These weren't voice messages or data. They were simple electronic handshakes between the plane and space. The signals painted an impossible picture. Flight 370 had continued flying until 8:19 that morning. It had stayed airborne for nearly 7 hours after disappearing. The final ping came from somewhere far from its planned route. But where exactly had it gone? The satellite data created two giant arcs across the globe. One curved north through Kazakhstan and China. The other swept south across the endless Indian Ocean. The aircraft could be anywhere along either line. Search teams faced a terrifying truth. They weren't looking for a crash site anymore. They were hunting for a ghost plane that had flown into the unknown. Countries rushed to help. Australia sent ships toward the southern search area. The United States deployed advanced listening equipment. Britain shared satellite images. India offered radar data from their military bases. Never before had so many nations worked together to solve such a puzzle. Search grids stretched across millions of square miles. Ocean depths in some areas reached 3 miles down. If the plane had crashed in the Southern Ocean, finding it would be like locating a needle in a haystack the size of Australia. Each day brought new questions. Why had the plane turned? Who had controlled it during those final hours? What happened in that cockpit on a night that should have been routine? The satellite pings held their secrets tight. They offered just enough information to prove the impossible had happened, but they revealed nothing about why. The Southern Indian Ocean, conclusion and continued mystery. The final satellite signals whispered their secrets through space, carrying the last traces of MH370's journey. These electronic breadcrumbs were all that remained of 239 souls who had vanished into thin air. Deep inside secure facilities, scientists worked around the clock to decode these mysterious pings. The signals came from an automatic system called ACARS, sending routine health reports every hour like a heartbeat. But this heartbeat told a strange story. The frequency of each ping shifted slightly, like the changing pitch of a siren as it moves away. This shift held the key to understanding where the plane had gone. When a satellite receives signals from a moving object, the frequency changes based on speed and direction. It's called the Doppler effect. Hour by hour, the scientists traced these tiny changes. Each ping painted a piece of the puzzle. The airplane had flown for 7 more hours after disappearing from radar. 7 hours of flight with no human contact, no distress calls, no explanation. The calculations pointed to one terrible conclusion. MH370 had flown south, far south, into the most remote waters on Earth. The southern Indian Ocean stretched endlessly. cold and empty, thousands of miles from any land. On March 24th, Malaysia's Prime Minister stood before the world's cameras. His words were simple but devastating. The flight had ended in the southern Indian Ocean. There were no survivors. Families collapsed in grief. How could officials be so certain without finding a single piece of wreckage, without recovering a single body? The answer lay entirely in mathematics and satellite technology, invisible threads of evidence floating in space. The method seemed impossible to understand. A plane and 239 people had simply vanished, leaving behind only electronic whispers that took weeks to decode. Even the scientists admitted their calculations came with uncertainties. The search area covered thousands of square miles of treacherous ocean. Countries around the world watched in shock. If a modern airliner could disappear so completely, what did that mean for air travel? New questions emerged about tracking systems and emergency protocols. The families demanded proof beyond satellite calculations. They wanted wreckage, personal belongings, answers they could touch and hold. Instead, they received printouts of frequency charts and mathematical models that predicted their loved one's fate. Ships began searching the predicted crash zone, dragging sonar equipment through waters miles deep. The ocean kept its secrets hidden beneath crushing depths and endless darkness. Technology had provided an answer, but somehow created more questions than it solved. The satellite pings told investigators where to look, but finding proof in that vast underwater wilderness would prove nearly impossible. New discoveries and shifting theories, debris and breakthroughs. The waves crashed against the rocky shore of Reunion Island on that July morning in 2015. A man walking along the beach stopped when he saw something strange. Half buried in the sand lay a piece of metal, curved and weathered by salt water. He had no idea. He was looking at the first real clue to one of aviation's greatest mysteries. The piece was a flaperon, part of an airplane's wing that helps control flight. Scientists quickly confirmed what many had hoped and feared. This metal fragment came from MH370. For over a year, the world had wondered what happened to the missing plane. Now, after drifting thousands of miles across the Indian Ocean, a piece of the aircraft had finally spoken. But its message only deepened the puzzle. More debris began washing up on distant shores. A piece of wing panel appeared in Mauritius, then fragments in Mozambique. Each discovery painted the same grim picture. The plane had broken apart somewhere in the vast ocean. Scientists studied how ocean currents move. They fed data into powerful computers, trying to trace where these pieces started their long journey. The models pointed to areas far from where searchers had been looking. Teams returned to the ocean with new technology. Underwater robots dove deeper than ever before. Sonar systems could now map the seafloor in incredible detail. Each mission brought hope that the main wreckage would finally be found. But the ocean kept its secrets well hidden. Every search revealed more about the deep sea floor, but nothing about the plane itself. The debris told investigators that MH370 had crashed, but not why or exactly where. International teams worked together, sharing expertise and resources. French authorities examined the flaperon in their labs. Malaysian officials coordinated with dozens of countries. Each piece of debris underwent careful analysis. The discoveries changed how experts thought about the mystery. Early theories about hijacking or mechanical failure seemed less likely. The evidence suggested the plane had flown for hours before its final plunge. Yet each answer raised new questions. How did the plane fly so far off course? Why did it change direction multiple times? Who was controlling it during those final hours? The debris provided proof of the tragedy, but not its cause. Families of the passengers finally had confirmation their loved ones were gone, but they still had no explanation for why. The search continues today, driven by fragments of metal that crossed an ocean to tell their story. Each piece brings investigators closer to the truth, while somehow making the mystery feel even more profound. Human factors and lasting questions, investigation and speculation. The investigation took a dark turn when experts began looking closely at the people inside the cockpit that night. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah became the center of intense examination. His home flight simulator held secrets that made investigators pause. On that computer, Zahari had practiced a route that looked eerily similar to MH370's final path. The simulation showed a plane flying over the Indian Ocean until it ran out of fuel. This discovery sent chills through the investigation team. But was this evidence of a planned action, or simply a pilot exploring dangerous scenarios like many aviators do? The answer remained frustratingly out of reach. Investigators dug deeper into Zahari's life. They examined his internet searches, his phone calls, his personal relationships. They spoke to family members and friends. They analyzed his mental state in the weeks before the flight. What they found was a complex man facing personal struggles. His marriage was troubled. He supported political causes that put him at odds with his government. Yet nothing pointed clearly to someone planning mass destruction. The first officer, Farooq Abdul Hamid, also faced scrutiny. At 27, he was young and relatively inexperienced. Had he been overwhelmed by an emergency? Could he have made a fatal mistake? The evidence remained silent. Three main theories emerged from the investigation. Perhaps someone hijacked the plane, though no group claimed responsibility. Maybe a sudden technical failure confused the crew, leading them off course. Or possibly, one of the pilots deliberately crashed the aircraft. Each theory had supporters among the experts. Each had problems that couldn't be solved. The technical failure theory seemed logical. Modern planes are complex machines with millions of parts. Something could have gone wrong in the electronics bay, creating chaos in the cockpit, while leaving the plane capable of flying for hours. The hijacking theory explained the sudden course change and the disabled communication systems. But who were these hijackers? How did they board? Why was there no ransom demand? The pilot's suicide theory was the most disturbing. It explained the deliberate actions taken to hide the plane's path, but it painted a respected captain as a mass murderer without clear motive. Despite years of investigation, thousands of interviews, and millions of dollars spent, no theory could be proven beyond doubt. The evidence pointed in multiple directions while confirming nothing definitively. Investigators face the hardest truth in their careers. Sometimes, even with the best technology and the most dedicated experts, mysteries refuse to give up their secrets. MH370 had become one of those rare cases where the questions outnumber the answers. The families of the missing passengers waited for closure that might never come. Persistent hope, ongoing research, and the legacy of MH370. Years have passed since MH370 vanished into the darkness. Yet something remarkable has emerged from this tragedy. The empty sky left behind has become filled with new hope and determination. In deep ocean laboratories around the world, scientists work day and night. They build robots that can dive deeper than ever before. These metal explorers carry lights and cameras into places where no human has ever gone. The search for MH370 taught them how little they knew about the ocean floor. New maps now show underwater mountains and valleys that were invisible before. Computer programs track ocean currents with frightening accuracy. Satellites watch the seas from space, recording every wave and shadow. The technology born from this search has opened doors to mysteries we never knew existed. Families of the passengers refuse to give up. They meet in small groups, sharing photographs and memories. Their voices carry across oceans through video calls and online forums. These ordinary people have become detectives, studying flight paths and weather patterns. They ask questions that experts sometimes forget to ask. Grace Nathan lost her mother on that flight. She now travels the world, speaking to aviation officials and government leaders. Her quiet strength has moved mountains of bureaucracy. She reminds everyone that behind every missing flight number are real people with real lives. Independent researchers have joined this endless quest. They spend their own money on expeditions and equipment. Some are retired pilots who understand the sky. Others are computer programmers who see patterns in data. Together, they form an unlikely army of truth seekers. Aviation rules have changed forever because of MH370. Airlines now track their planes every few minutes instead of every hour. Black boxes stay powered longer and send signals farther. New laws require better communication between countries when planes go missing. The Indian Ocean holds its secrets tightly, but pieces of the plane still wash up on distant beaches. Each fragment tells part of the story. Scientists study the barnacles and salt stains like ancient writing on stone tablets. Deep-sea mapping projects continue their patient work. They scan thousands of square miles of ocean floor each year. The same technology now helps find lost ships from centuries past. It reveals underwater ecosystems that amaze marine biologists. Children who were young when MH370 disappeared are now studying engineering and aviation. They carry the memory of this mystery into their careers. They design better tracking systems and safer aircraft. The missing flight has shaped a new generation of problem solvers. The search continues because some questions demand answers. Somewhere in the vast blue darkness, MH370 waits to tell its final story.